Hello. I'm talking to Ty today about his masculinity class in the men's program. I'm going to put that in the chat down here. We're going to be figuring out what Ty's going to be teaching. Should be here in a second. Um, There he is. Okay, Ty, you have to send me a request because for some reason when I invite people, it does not work. So I'm putting in the chat, we're talking about Ty's masculinity class within the men's program. And I'm going to pin that comment. Okay. Okay. All right, I accepted your request. Let's see if it works. This is always a little finicky. Yeah. Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. There's gonna be like construction work sounds in the background, I think.
Okay, well, there's usually a garbage truck or some kind of truck on my street too, so we'll just hold for noise. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ty. My pronouns are he, him. Um, I like to teach embodied consent, and I'm wiggling my way into teaching about gender and masculinity, because I think that it's a strength for me. So, and I'd like to share some of my ideas. So, yeah. Hi.
Okay, great. Um, okay, well, so the goal today was to about and maybe solidify a little bit what you're going to be teaching in the program. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah, can we start with like how you define masculinity?
Yeah. I mean, so thinking about doing this IG live, I started with the thought of like, how do I define masculinity? And that's kind of a hard question, I think, because my understanding of masculinity for the most part is there are like so many definitions that exist, but for the most part, I think that it's a social construct that gets pushed upon folks, depending on your identity, what was pushed on you when you were born. It's just a social construct that gets placed on you, and there's all of these roving concepts, and like it's very contextual. But I think it's that, and then we take from that and put that to ourselves and like mesh it with our own identities. And that's why I think it's also contextual in the way that my masculinity might present differently in different scenarios and different situations. But the beauty of like the lack of definition, or like the vagueness, or like sort of aura that it encompasses, I think like there's a lot of magic in that, because you get to choose what masculinity is to you. There's all these like concepts of it being like it's your strength, it's this, it's that, like it's virility, it's da da da, and like I don't identify with that. It's also like security, respect, all of these different things, and I don't know, gender's like made up to me. So having like, I think the beauty of it is in how you define it for yourself. And it's also acknowledging and taking apart structures of like toxic masculinity that exist, because that have a rigid definition. But
Yeah, I'm thinking from like the perspective of building a class structure. This is an interesting way in to talk about like how do we learn what masculinity is, like from the outside in,
yeah.
and we want to define it from the inside out. Like what your personal definition of it?
Yeah, because I think it starts with force. Like it starts with what's forced on us, and then through acknowledging what's forced on us, I think we can start to unravel that a little bit more and understand like the different areas in which that force is pushed on us, and the ways in which that manifests inside of ourselves. And like, yeah, that allows space for you to decide like what aspects you enjoy, what aspects you don't, what aspects feed you, what aspects like don't, what is like good for you and your community and your ability to like be a part of things and what isn't. Because when it comes to toxic masculinity and traits that are associated with that, so much of that is based off of like isolation and independence and like being your own da da da, and it's like so capitalist in this way, and it's, I don't know, it's just a completely unnecessary binary. But
Mm.
yeah.
Okay, there's a few things coming to mind. One is this idea that I think is like really central to how I think about consent, that's like moving away from asking like these objective or these questions that are attempting to get at some kind of objectivity, like is this good? Like
Mhm.
right, things like that, and moving towards what you said, which is like, do I like it? Like,
Yeah,
does it feel like me? Um, and I feel like that's something that really pervades like this entire program for sure. And like every class that I've done, it's like really getting in touch with what what works for me, what feels right to me, and how do I want to express that. So from the perspective of you mentioned like embodied consent, um, how do you envision helping people like feel that for themselves?
like in terms of masculinity,
Yeah, like redefining it in a way that is yours.
I think it would honestly start with some journal prompts because it feels like a very reflective space,
Yeah.
to figure that out, like talking to, I mean, personally, like I think I should just speak from myself, but I think I would start with like talking to child me, um,
Mm,
noticing influences that were pushed on me, and like also desires that popped up as well, because it's like masculinity can be this force that's pushed on you that can feel incredibly constricting, but there are also like, as a kid who like, you know, didn't grow up being looked at as a boy, like, you know, there were also like these different things where I was like, whoa, that's cool, I want that. Like there's a certain level of freedom that exists there too, and like I can express myself in these ways, but oh, I can't express myself in these. And
mm,
so I think it's like starting to figure those things out, because then you can start to notice where the blockages are, you
right.
know. Like, I think one of the things about masculinity is like it makes me think about balance much of the time. Like, I don't know. I don't, yeah. I would really start with some like reflective journal prompts and start thinking about it like back like from childhood, and thinking about the ways in which you interacted with your parents, the ways you interacted with like a masculine figure in your life. You know, it even comes down to like thinking about moments where, well, thinking about how you feel about femininity as well,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
about gender in total, and like what in your mind is creating the dichotomy between femininity and masculinity, and like what things do you attribute rigidly to femininity and rigidly to masculinity, and starting to like kind of dissolve that a little bit more, because it goes deeper than that. You start doing that and it's like, why did those come about? Do we believe in biological sex? Like, what's going on, you know? And so I think that there's so many things like masculinity and like talks about gender and stuff like that make me think about that like iceberg, you know, where it's
Yeah.
like things on top but there's so much underneath it. So
Yeah. This has me thinking about like my parents were attempting to understand a little better like gender stuff, and they asked me to like tell them my gender journey, and it was very awkward, but one thing that did come out of it was that I said something that I thought was just like, everyone must feel this way, that like when you're a kid, when I was a kid, I thought that it was better to be a boy, like just factually, like obviously, and I thought that was like, I don't know, I didn't feel like that was unique to me. And when I said that to my parents, they were shocked. They were like, why? Where did that come from? Like, did that come from us? And I was like, what? You mean this isn't like an obvious truth? And that was really jarring. I really had to sit with that and be like, oh my God, like, what does that mean?
Yeah, like I believe this so deeply. Where did
Yeah,
it come?
like I thought it was just obvious to everyone. It's clearly better to be a boy. You get to do more things, you get to play more, like you don't have to take yourself so seriously. You can kind of do whatever you, I mean, that's how I thought about it as a kid. I was like,
For sure.
yeah, they get to do more stuff. They get in, like, they can be messy and they can like play around and not, yeah, like not worry so much about how people perceive them.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a big part of it for me too as a kid, where I was like, oh, you don't have to be like contained. You don't have to like be clean all of the time. I can spread my legs, like, I can just like not have to like cross, and I don't know. Just there was so many things, but again, that's why I'm like, it's a social construct though, because like literally every body and ability level should be able to do whatever the fuck they want when it comes to that stuff, you know?
Right.
And so that's where I'm like there's masculinity that's pushed on you by society, and then there's like completely other area where it's like, yeah, but like what does that mean to me, and like what do I, it's kind of like the toolbox metaphor or something like that, where it's like you have this thing and like you take little bits and pieces of what works for you, and that's kind of how I think about it. But yeah, I also feel like deeply non-binary and really love like that anything can kind of be anything.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so this has me, the class is sort of taking shape now. I'm like envisioning like a defining of like societal masculinity and femininity and then personalizing it. And
Mm-hmm.
hearing about like uh getting into the like getting granular about what that process is like of checking in with yourself and finding what feels right to you. Because I think that for a lot of people, that's where there's this blockage, is this like getting out of the mindset of like, how am I being perceived, and into the mindset of like, what is mine and what feels authentic. Like just
Mm-hmm.
that alone can be really complicated. So I'm wondering if you have any ideas about how to explore that.
Yeah. Um, the first thing that comes to mind is like noticing where frustration arises in your life,
Mm,
like that feels specific to like gendered norms.
yeah.
Noticing where the frustration comes up. That's one of my first ways in, you know, is like I'll be really, really frustrated about something that's happened, and then I have to ruminate on it a little bit longer, to bring myself to the place where I'm like, oh, that was a microaggression. Oh, like, you know, I'm actually really bothered by this because I feel like something's being projected onto me,
Yeah.
and I I'm feeling constricted because it's being like projected onto me. Um, I think, yeah, I'd have to spend a little bit more time in that area, but I think because like I think like part of the plight that, and I'm talking about like masculine centered people, like the plights that they experience through masculinity, I think a lot of it is a constricting of identity, and like that's where that force comes in. And so I'm like noticing moments, like beginning to bring some sort of attention and awareness to the moments where you do feel constricted, because bringing awareness to that is what's going to allow you to like find the space to be more expansive in those moments, and to give yourself the space that like other people aren't necessarily willing to give you in that moment because of the ways that you look, assumptions that they've made about how you are as an emotional being, things like that.
Yeah. Okay. So when you said constricted, I was writing down the word limitations.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm curious about this idea. Well, two things. So one is like where are where are the external ideas of masculinity limiting really everybody, like not just people who identify as men?
Oh no, not at all. But it's yeah, I think. Oh, you know that I have so much to talk about when it comes to masculinity and how it affects literally all of us.
Yeah.
But
Well, okay, so that ties into my next point. I want to go there, which
yeah,
is the limitations, and then sort of the like flip side of that, which is like what what do I, what does everyone get out of this kind of inquiry? Like what is the expansion that comes?
I'm
Excuse me.
thinking of it in like a three-part where it's like, what are the limitations pushed on me by society, in specifically around masculinity? What are the limitations I push on myself around masculinity? And what are limitations that I project onto other people when it comes to masculinity?
Ooh,
I think that that's something that we leave out a lot of the time. And I'm gonna close my windows because the construction's still loud.
sure. Okay. From society, limitations from yourself, and limitations. Cool. While he's doing that, this is by CJ Kitten Miller. You can get them through the link in her bio. It says bodies are gifts to the earth.
Yeah, support CJ.
Yeah, support CJ. Okay, I wrote it down. You need me to read it? Want me to read it?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. Limitations from society, limitations from self, and limitations that I project onto others.
yeah. Yeah, that sounds like a triple thread of really good tools to start off with.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That I'm also envisioning, because this is how my brain works, like a post, with like three different like limitations from society, limitations from self, and limitations that I project onto other people.
For sure. But I think like that all together is like important because I think like for myself, thinking about masculinity, like, and my own relationship with it, like, yes, it's really expansive, like when you're able to create that space for yourself, but it's also really difficult, like in the same way of like when you go through this process of like learning about consent, there's like the grief period of like moments in which you have harmed other people or harm has been done to you, and this feeling of like, wow, I could have done better had I known this stuff. Like, I think that there's something similar that happens when you start to like explore your gender identity and like you explore ways in which masculinity has like touched your life in ways that have been really harmful to you, and ways in which you've perpetuated masculine norms and hurt other people like in doing so. And I definitely think that that's a really, really important process to go through as well. It's just, I think a lot of language around masculinity is so entrenched in shame that
Mm,
I really want there to be space for people to like look at themselves and hold themselves accountable for moments in which they have caused harm or made other people uncomfortable or silenced, like taken up too much space, dimmed somebody else's light. Like, I
yeah,
want space for all of that, but at the same time, like, there needs to be an unwrapping of the shame. Like, there's just too much shame, and I don't think that there's space for healing when there's like that much shame and pressure pushed onto people. So,
yeah,
and it really, again, masculinity is like something that we look at, like especially toxic masculinity, we look at cis men and we look at them and go, oh fuck, like with a lot of the ways in which they move. But like that view of masculinity being so heavy and so negative, like ultimately affects a lot of folks that do not identify as cis men, that like do not identify as masculine even, like if we look for physical attributes or different signs like that to tell us that somebody is going to be uh overbearing and oversharer, like, you know, like a mansplainer, that they're going to like have innate violent tendencies, that da 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 da, you know, that they're more prone to getting angry and aggressive, stuff like that. Like that has ramifications outside of just affecting cis men. That affects trans men, trans masculine folks. It affects trans women as well. And it also like affects a lot of non-white people. It affects black women. It affects a lot of different people that do not show up and look like stereotypical cis white women. And so like it's really important for us to like start to unwrap some of the shame around like, yeah, these concepts of masculinity, and also look at the ways in which like I would really love to focus on the projection quality of masculinity.
Yeah, and what that feels like in your body. I'm thinking, like, as you're talking, I'm thinking about the structure of the class, and I think that's a really great way to end, is like this sort of combo of like how to metabolize this grief and shame. Because I think, you know, your class is going to come after all the consent frameworks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool.
I think there's going to be a lot of that has already come up, you know,
Mm-hmm.
a
They're
lot of conversations around what?
they're very entwined.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's also something that I think you have a unique take on and are really good at, is like grief, grief processing. Yeah, moving it around. So, you know, it's only a 2 hour class, but I'm thinking like that's a good thing to sort of end on, so that it's not just like, you know, the class doesn't just end with people with like their face in their hands, like, oh God. Like,
Yeah, yeah. Oh, for sure. I think I think a lot of journaling is gonna happen in that class, just because like it's just so reflective. Like you gotta to be able to get in there. But I think also some discussion, some moments for discussion and stuff. And I
um,
think I'm good at asking thoughtful questions. You know, I think I might pace it so that the questions towards the end are a little bit like, don't leave you going like,
yeah,
you know, that kind of leave you in like a, okay, okay, feeling a little bit more empowered about this, feeling like I have some more awareness and some tools. I also like when you said, how do I metabolize this? I'm like thinking about if there are avenues for repair or things like that.
yeah,
A very, very empowering thing, you know, to be able to have to repair. And that doesn't necessarily mean like between two people, because that requires consent, you know, but there are other mechanisms of like repair that are available to folks as well. I can think about that more.
yeah. And also like repair with yourself. I mean, I think so much of the way that, you know, societally prescribed masculinity impacts people when it comes to practicing consent with themselves. Like there's a lot of harm that I think people cause to themselves when they push themselves to do stuff that they think they're supposed to do,
Oh,
especially sexually. Um,
yeah.
ooh, ooh. uh, there was like a crunch outside because there's a like slow down thing and people just go right over
Yeah.
it. um, yeah, there's a lot of people. I mean, and I've had this experience. I think probably it's pretty universal, like having done things that you didn't really want to do, that you wanted, like you wanted to. You know, I've definitely been in situations where I'm like, I want to be this kind of person, and so I do something that I'm like, well, I actually didn't really want to do that, like in that moment, or maybe at all.
Uh,
And usually it, you know, it's like I'm the only one really to blame, or not to blame. I mean, it's like there doesn't need to be blame. It's like social, it's that social coercion where it's like the systems tell us like this is what you're supposed to do, and then we internalize that.
the like less blame and like more of an acknowledgement, like that I'm the only one who can say yes or no to this.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And then again, back to that idea of like checking in with yourself and being like, do I want this, or is this something that I'm performing, or something that's like a should?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the conversations like regarding masculinity and over to toxic masculinity, like ask things of folks to reflect on like harm in which they've perpetuated with other people. And I think that that is a very, very important thing to be like reflecting on and looking at. But I think without it coming in tandem with somebody also looking at the ways in which like masculinity and structures of like gender norms have like hurt them, like the person who has caused the harm based off of it, like without noticing how those structures harm you. I You know, as somebody who works with plants and knows that root systems are really important, like it makes it hard for me to believe that like that's going to be like a very like holistic and like a process that holds any sort of longevity to it. I think that you really need to like also hold like, okay, this structure of masculinity, all of these honestly at times like violent norms that have been placed on me as expectations, how have they metabolized in my body, and how do I perpetuate that on a daily basis? Like it can't just be, I think, looking at yourself and noticing that these things exist inside of you and coding it with shame and talking to yourself like you shouldn't be that way, you need to get rid of that shit, you would cause so much harm all of the time, you're a bad person. Like where's the healing ever going to happen in that space, you know? And especially when we realize that we're all like fucking babies and we've all been conditioned in a specific way, and nobody is born out of the womb like holding all of this within themselves, you know?
Yeah.
Like there's harm that has been done since day one, and like masculinity can be beautiful, but oftentimes it's this violent force that's pushed onto literally everybody in just different capacities. And so I think like really sitting with that and holding space for that grief, like, you know, no matter which way masculinity has touched and affected your life, like I don't think that any one identity necessarily takes precedent over another when it comes to thinking about this idea, you know, and looking at the ways in which it's shaped and touched your life. Like, and that's kind of the crux of which I really hope, I hope more people can like have some openness to get there and look at that, um and look at it like everybody deserves to go through that process, and
Yeah.
you know, acknowledge that stuff, because I don't see masculinity and like, you know, toxic aspects of it have like shaped a lot of society. Patriarchy has shaped society in a lot of ways that are incredibly harmful and suck, and that's, you know, also capitalism and all these different things that weave its way in there. But like at the same time there's space for it to be something really, really sweet. And I just don't think that we can move at the pace we're moving without acknowledging that like there needs to be some healing and there needs to be some like care put towards it, not just like parental like that's bad, but like actual care, um,
Yeah.
to be held. You know, we talk about how boys can't cry and blah blah blah, and I'm like, cool, why isn't the natural tendency to be like that means that something needs to be held, right? But then it depends on like who's willing to hold that. And that's why I say that men, if you're dealing with this stuff, you need to learn to hold yourself, you know?
Mm.
And that's where a lot of the healing work, you need to learn to hold yourself through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do we
I
do that?
what?
How do we give tools to that, you
Yeah,
know?
right. That's where my mind went, is like, and I think you have a lot of tools to share. I the last thing coming up for me is that this idea of like, berating yourself out of toxic masculinity or something like that. It's like I I talk so much about how I think it's really hard to practice consent from an insecure place. And
Yeah.
so a lot of like being able to practice consent in an embodied way is about getting in touch with your confidence and like being able to access that. And
Mm-hmm.
if the way that you're processing like your shame and um, the way that you're trying to take accountability is by like just blaming and shaming and guilting yourself, it's actually going to prevent you from getting to a place where you can practice consent.
Yeah, that expansive space in your body that like can open up when you're feeling confident and like open, it just crunched down. It's not accessible anymore. Now it's just filled with dread and like self-hatred, and that's not going to lead you anywhere.
No.
But I will say that acknowledging that you're experiencing dread and self-hatred in that moment can be a window in as well.
Yeah.
Not not all bad. I know a lot of us experience feelings like that, you know? And so it's like, okay, that's there. Where do we go from there though? That's not the voice in which I deserve to be talking to myself with though.
Yeah, yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I feel good. How do you feel?
I feel good too. I just feel like I have air sign brain where I'm like thinking about all the things, you know, because it's weird coming in here because I was like, masculinity is such a big concept. What do I actually want to talk about? What do I actually want to teach? But I think, yeah, uh, core aspects to it is like unwrapping the shame and finding mechanisms to be able to do that, but also like acknowledging, yeah, it's a force. It gets forced on us. How do we like acknowledge that that's something that's been forced on us and take it and turn it into something else? I think like, yeah, like something transformative in there when it
Yeah.
comes to like transforming masculinity, because I think that what's given to us when it comes to masculinity is absolutely something that needs to be transformed in some way to actually be held with like grace and like openness, you know?
Yeah. Beautiful.
Beep, beep, beep.
Boop, 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 beep. All right, Ty. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye, bro.
Bye-bye.